ICQ Podcast Episode 260, Xiegu X108G Review. Well, hello fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts and welcome to this, our 260th episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported as always by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Chris at Mike Zero Tango Charlie Hotel, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, and Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is from Ed on the Xiegu X108G, which he's reviewed recently. Well, as always, we couldn't keep the podcast show advert free without the support of our donors, and at this episode, we'd like to thank again the monthly and annual subscription donors who give us a bit of a base to help us pay our way. But we always need more to obviously pay our hosting costs for all the various services we do. So please consider us by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate, where anything you can send our way is always greatly appreciated. Well, now we join Martin, Chris, Dan and Ed as they discuss the latest amateur ham radio news, including are we of a year of solar minimum and the ARRL calls for action on symbol rate limits. Hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys and welcome to episode 260 of the ICQ News Roundtable. 260 is a real good number. Dan, I have Dan with me, Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU.
Cheers, guys.
Good to have you on, Dan. Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Hello, all.
And Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Good evening. How are we all doing tonight?
Well, he's okay, I think. Unfortunately, Mr. Rothwell, Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, can't make it tonight. He's doing an airport run, so picking his lady up from the airport. So he'll be back in a few weeks' time with us. And as I say, that's the team for tonight. Our first news story: are we at the solar minimum this year? There's a couple of things being published on the internet about this solar cycle and what's going on. And Ed, you found some interesting graphs from a Belgium group, but you also said you've had some reasonable contacts recently. So over to you first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's the I think it's university, or it's the Solar Terrestrial Centre of Excellence in Belgium. It's Institute for Space Astronomy, or Aeronomy, it says here, but anyway, never mind. Part of the Royal Observatory of Belgium. And they've been doing some analysis, and while they're not actually saying it is the end of the solar cycle, they're saying, looking at the data, it could be that we're going to hit the absolute bottom this year, 2018, not 2020, 2021 as originally thought. If that's true, that's great news, because most amateurs on the HF bands are just hoping that we start and get improved numbers of sunspots and better conditions sooner rather than later. But as you said, Martin, this week there's been quite a bit on 20 and 40 metres. On 20 on Monday, I was hearing stations in North Africa and Sweden like they were literally next door to me. And at the same time, stations coming in from the US and Australia and Japan all at the same time at a reasonable signal level as well on my wire antenna. And then today on that was on 20 metres. Today on 40 metres, I actually heard some Indian stations. So it's amazing. The solar weather says the bands should be very average or closed. And you still have times of, several hours at the moment in early afternoons where it seems we're getting good conditions. So, that's great stuff. Maybe it is a sign of it changing, that we are already starting to get part of cycle 25 coming in. But I don't think so yet. But I think, like everybody, we hope that it's not going to be, 3 years of the doldrums.
Yeah. Well, as I say, anything that improves HF in my opinion is good. Dan, have you noticed that anything changing?
Well, just the last couple of weeks or last couple of days, the band conditions have seemed pretty good here, but bands go up and down, so you can't really tell if what the trend is, right? I mean, even from this chart here, you can see the solar flux goes up and down quite a bit.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if people sit and listen and don't call, or the band can appear dead when it isn't. So, don't you think?
Right.
Yeah. So, Chris, your thoughts on this one?
So yeah, I've not been doing much HF to be fair recently. Whenever I've been on the air, it's been pretty quiet. So, but I'm not on every day. So like Ed and Dan probably have more regular on the air than me. Although it's funny you talk about someone calling CQ. I was looking on Twitter earlier and someone said exactly that. He said that, he was listening out, there was nobody there, called CQ, and then he worked someone in the States straight away. So, it could be everyone just listening and not actually calling CQ. So maybe I should try that myself sometime.
Yeah. Well, as I say, we've certainly found it when we've been out operating that, you call CQ on a dead band and you often get somebody there. So, let's hope that the Sunspot minimum is coming 3 years or a couple of years early, and we start getting back to the good stuff.
Yeah, the prediction, looking at a chart a bit further down in the linked report, read the show notes, everybody, is May 2018 is the most likely period from their stats of being the solar minimum, the absolute solar minimum. So that's only May, what's that, 3 months away?
Certainly is.
That'll be nice. Because then it starts to go uphill again.
Certainly, that's great. Okay.
Mark Twain, has a comment of sort of something appropriate here. He said this about the weather, but we could talk about the space weather. He said, everybody complains about the weather, but no one does anything about it.
Very good.
Hey,
I suppose they are trying to predict something that's quite hard to predict. I mean, looking at the graphs that's on the website there, it looks like the minimum lasts for a little while, and then before things start to improve. So we'll see. Obviously, they've done some calculations. Let's hope things improve. And of course, we don't know what the next solar cycle holds for us. It might be that it's got a good, peak. It maybe it's actually not so good. So the last one I know wasn't as good as previous times. So let's hope things are going to improve for us, and we get some good HF conditions coming up.
Yeah. Well, you talk about Dan talked about nobody does anything about it. It was only a few months ago we were talking about the US Air Force seeding the ionosphere.
That's right.
So
I forgot about that.
I don't think that was April 1st, though, Dan. But sometimes we see these.
Maybe they've started. That's maybe why the Belgians are seeing the difference already.
There you go.
Yeah. So, we have a bit of fun on here, but, according to these graphs, they'll be in the show notes, we are hitting the minimum, hopefully a little bit early, and hopefully it starts getting better soon. So, all in all, whatever way of making the HF bands better, I'm all for it. Even if it is the US Air Force seeding the ionosphere. So, okay, moving on. The ARRL again calls for action on the symbol rates. And we've kind of kicked this one around before, but, the ARRL still pushing on this one. Dan, your side of the pond. Do you want to go first on it?
Sure. So, this has been an ongoing thing. There was a request for rulemaking put in by the ARRL 3 or 4 years ago now about the idea being we should not restrict the symbol rate, but rather the bandwidth. And for whatever reason, that didn't get through. And in fact, I guess it's still on the books. And now they're trying it again, sort of under the guise of, if we allow this now, we'll be able to do things like emergency communications in Puerto Rico a lot better. And, there's good points and bad points about both. And there's actually a lot of people here in the U.S. that are concerned that allowing these wideband transmissions in the areas of the band where currently narrowband transmissions, such as CW and RTTY, are, that those will just swamp out, CW operators and PSK operators and teletype operators. Whether that's actually going to happen, who really knows? But that's the two sides of the issue. And, I can see both sides. In a way, restricting symbol rates is inhibiting innovation. On the other hand, you don't want them to just go crazy all over the band either. So that's the crux of the issue.
Yeah. Chris, what's your thoughts on this one?
To be honest with you, not much more to add really from what Dan was saying. Obviously, in the past, we talked about this, and we talked about it, stifling innovation, and I think bandwidth, is obviously the way to go, rather than, limiting the amount of data you can transfer. Yeah.
Well, I know, Ed, you were saying at the beginning, before we started recording, that everybody else in the world limits it to bandwidth, don't they? It's only the States that's on symbol rate.
As far as I know, that's the case. I don't know of any other country that uses symbol rate as a way of controlling the use of the digital modes and the machine-derived modes. But maybe I guess it'll depend on if you say for this particular new mode, whatever classification it's given, your bandwidth can only be 1 kilohertz maximum or 500 hertz maximum or whatever. And that might be the way to control against the problems that Dan thinks could occur. In a lot of countries in the world, by the way, Dan, the SSB sections of the band are often all mode. So you have your CW section, your digital section, and your all mode section, which means that you can get digital and CW in where you'd normally expect sideband to be.
Well, that actually is the way it is here too.
Oh, okay, right. So it may be a way to say, okay, digital modes. If you want to protect the CW section, okay, you're not allowed in there, and the band plan says you do it in the all mode section.
Well, it's more likely to happen in the States that you can restrict, because the band plan in the States is mandatory, whereas certainly the UK, the band plan is a gentleman's agreement, but they kind of get you the other way round, because you're not supposed to cause interference as part of your license, and if you're interfering with another amateur, you're causing interference. So interesting.
That's a good point. And the reason some of these guys are getting excited about this, excuse me, is because these are automatic stations, right? They don't listen to see if somebody's using those frequencies before they start transmitting, and that's part of the problem too.
Yeah.
This WinLink and Pactor, they're automatic stations.
Yeah, as I say, unless they, the only one I can think of that is automatic and just blurts, but then even that listens is APRS, where you sometimes get where the APRS goes over the top of each other, but everybody's on the same frequency.
Well, I think a lot of digital modes.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I think a lot of digital modes, for example, something like Whisper, you're on a timer, and obviously there's more than one person at once transmitting, but obviously they are, like Dan was saying, like an automatic system where it's I guess with something like Whisper, you're not making a transmission to one particular person. You're almost like you're beaconing, aren't you, I suppose? And I suppose it's the same with APRS. You're beaconing to a number of anybody that's out there that wants to listen, I suppose.
Maybe, yeah. Oh well, let's keep an eye on this one and see how the ARRL gets on with this one, and whether the FCC and the ARRL are able to change it and to something that's more amenable to people. Dan, you come up with the next one, the ARRL governance news, and you told us that the ARRL CEO has resigned, and it looks like a lot more going on there, Dan.
Yeah, so we talked about this in our segment a couple of months ago about the goings on with the ARRL board, and they just had their annual meeting the end of January, and a lot of things have happened in between. So in between, a lot of the hams here in the U.S. have gotten organized even, and formed a vocal opposition to some of the things that were going on with the board. And among the things that have happened is our CEO, NY2RF, has retired. They say he's retired, not resigned. And they've pulled back on some of the more onerous sections of the quote-unquote code of conduct. And this is really quite an amazing thing. And I think it's as a result of so many hams being so ticked off about this that they contacted their directors and told them they didn't want this to happen. One of the directors reports that someone had gotten more than 1,000 messages about this, and another got nearly 800 messages, and it's quite an uprising of the ARRL membership.
That's good because it's I guess it's showing that there is obviously a democracy there, and people are voicing their opinion rather than just saying, keeping quiet and not actually showing interest. People actually are bothering to take an interest, and hopefully they'll say to people, listen. It's obviously, like you say, we've had the CEO that's retiring, which may or may not be something to do with this. So yeah, people are listening, which is good.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I was saying earlier before we started, the lots of societies and clubs are still living in the world of 50 years ago, and we've moved on. There are new technologies. The members want to do more different things. Things happen quicker. There's so many things that we have to move with the times, and that's the worry in my book. What do you think, Ed?
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. Actually, that's the change, isn't it? The ARRL, I believe, is, however, a corporation, so an actual company. Is that correct, Dan?
Well, so they're a non-profit corporation, and they're even a specific type of non-profit corporation. They're a membership-based non-profit corporation. So what might be appropriate? The example I gave is there's a nonprofit corporation here in Ann Arbor that runs a kids science museum, and the members of the board of directors of that organization are appointed from amongst their supporters. The ARRL is different in that the board is directly elected by the membership. So it's a totally different thing. And some of us thought that they were trying to run the ARRL as sort of a cross between a corporate board and one of these nonprofit boards that had an appointed board, not an elected board. And that's just not going to fly.
It's not democratic.
No, it's not democratic at all. And some of the proposals that were made were actually going to make it less democratic. For example, the current president and vice presidents of the ARRL are appointed positions. They're appointed by the board. They don't have a board vote. Only the elected board members have a vote. Well, one of the proposals was to give those appointed members or appointed positions board votes, even though none of them were elected, which it still amazes me that somebody would even think that's a good idea.
Yeah, but it appears that with all the comments that have been made and complaints that have been made, that they're certainly slowing down on what they wanted to, what they were going to do. I think this happens to all non-commercial organisations from time to time, where they have to have a bit of a kick in the backside and think about what they're doing and make sure they're doing what their members want.
Right. And that's exactly what's going on here. I think, at least I hope so. I hope the converse is true. The members are saying, "Hey, that's enough. We don't want that. Let's start moving in another direction."
Yeah. Hopefully, I agree with you, Dan. I hope that's the case.
So there's going to be hopefully anyway 2 links in the show notes. One is to a talk by Dick Norton, N6AA. He's the Southwest Division Director, and another is by a town hall conducted by NY2BB, who is the Hudson Division Director. And if you're at all interested in this topic, I'd urge you to listen to both of these talks. They're both about an hour and a half long, and I think they represent pretty well both sides of this issue. And like I say, if you're interested at all in this, give those a listen, and you'll hear right from the directors themselves what they're thinking about this.
Dan, you mentioned when we were on our pre-record chat that some things seem to have been parked, but not necessarily gone away. So the membership was asked for changes. If you park some of the changes, you can always resurrect them again. Is that a good or a bad thing?
Well, so that's what they're saying. They're saying, well, we're postponing action on these proposals, and whether or not they'll be brought up again is questionable. But there's certainly a possibility, and I think the way the membership has gotten so activated now, they're not going to let anything slip in. If those issues are brought up again at the next board meeting, everybody's prepared to inundate the directors with emails again, I think.
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, a lot of societies and clubs are still living in the 50 years ago. Their mentality is 50 years ago, and things are changing. And, new people are coming along, new technologies, new ideas. And we've got to move with the times and give the membership, be it club or society, what the membership wants. Otherwise, the whole thing will fall apart. So,
yep.
Yeah, so let's hope it all works out well. Moving on to our next news story. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a bad news story because it seems to be a UK thing, because I've heard of this a few times in the UK. But MB7 TV, which is a slow scan TV repeater, has gone off the air due to theft. Some nice person has shinned up the pole and ripped out all the gubbins on this antenna. So, Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, it appears that this, well, they call it a repeater. It might be better to call it a parrot, where it sort of doesn't store in a forward of somebody sending an SSTV picture to it, was located at some point up a mast on a side of a building somewhere, not where it was stated it was on the website. So this is from the Martello Tower Group, and what they've come back and said is they don't believe this has been done by an amateur. They believe it's just some opportune youth that's come by, seen the metal on the wall and thought, okay, I'll have that mast, that antenna, whatever's in that box, and has broken in, ripped everything out and taken it away. They thought that it was in a secure location, obviously not secure enough. Interesting, there was no camera or anything there either. So, they learn by the mistakes. Unfortunately, it's cost them dearly. About, what was it, 600 to £700 of equipment. So, in US dollars, almost $1,000 worth of equipment gone that will have to be replaced, and the repeater rebuilt from scratch. Then it's going to be located in the same location as some of their other repeaters, which is actually in a locked establishment. But it's really sad that there are people out there that will just go and steal from other people. But unfortunately, that's the world we're in.
Yeah, and often they don't even know what they're stealing. I would guess.
No, they've looked at it and gone, it's an aluminium mast. I know I can sell that for a £5. Oh, there's some electronics going. Oh, there's a computer in there. Oh, there's some kind of walkie-talkie thing. Okay, I can probably sell this to my mate down the road for, whatever. So, £600 or £700 worth of equipment was probably sold on for £50.
Yeah, and we don't know, but it could be even sold on to supply somebody's drug habit, for all we know. But not good to lose another repeater, and I believe they're putting it back. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a shame, because it may not have been a youth. It could be anybody of any age that's done this, but it is it does seem a bit strange that someone would steal the pole, the coax. But I suppose, people steal cable from the railways and I suppose any, like you were saying, Ed, it may be worth not a lot of money, the scrap man, but it just cost a lot of money to put up in the first place and a lot of time and effort. So it's a real shame that that's not there. But the guys there look like they're going to improve it, put it in maybe a more secure location and carry on. So at least there'll be a service there in the future. I think they are looking for donations, aren't they? So if anybody does want to donate, you can have a look at the martellotowergroup.com website, and there's information there. And if you want to make a donation to help pay for the new one.
Yeah. Dan, you were saying that you haven't heard of this sort of thing happening in the States. I'd say it's the second or third one I've heard of in the last 2 or 3 years in the UK. So maybe it's a UK thing.
Yeah, we don't hear too much about stuff like that here. As far as repeaters go. So I don't know what to say about that. Maybe our repeaters are in more secure locations. I don't know.
Yeah, or maybe they're run by individuals. A lot of yours are run by individuals, aren't they? So
there's a fair amount of
their
those,
homes or something.
Yeah,
it just seems it's an awkward thing in the UK, and it seems that something cable theft, as Chris was saying, is quite common in the UK, where suddenly our trains don't run because somebody's ripped out all the signalling for the copper. I know nowadays the police are getting far heavier on the scrap metal dealers to make sure that they, you literally, if you take any scrap metal into a dealer, you have to prove who you are, and they record everything that comes in. So, but a bit naughty all the same. Right, our next news story. I'm not going to put you on the spot on this one, Dan, but you can go on this one because it's another stateside story. We were discussing whether this was a 2-month early April Fool's. We don't think it is, but we're not sure. But we'll leave you to think about this one. A Texas company plans a 160-meter band wireless power transfer system. And... I can't go over this because if you're going to be using, wireless power down there on 160 meters, the States are much bigger on AM broadcast stations. But we'll let you have a go on this one in a minute, Dan. What do you think, Ed?
That was a nasty trick. I thought he was going to pass it to Dan. Okay, yeah. I mean, my reading will look to the website. Go look at the listeners. Go look at the links from the show notes. My gut feeling is they go with a lot of babble about the technology, about the fact they're going to radiate these radio waves all around the world, flood the world with this radiation, and it's going to be a very easy and cheap way to get your power. Hang on. If they're having to produce the power to pump into the transmitters, the megawatts transmitters to do this, where's the money going to come from? They aren't going to do this, out the kindness of their heart, giving money away to the rest of the world. Plus, technically, it sounds like a joke. And some of the descriptions of the people that are part of this seem to be all listed as ex-military people. Maybe that's just to give status to the front of the company. I certainly won't be buying shares in this company. I think they're not for real.
All right. Well, listen, you listeners can't see this, but Dan and Chris have got cameras on at the moment while we're recording this, and Dan's had a big smile on his face all the way through this. So, Dan, over to you.
Well, so. I mean, Ed's right here. There's a lot of babble, but not a lot of technical meat here. There's 2 papers, and I'm looking at one of them now, and it's actually one of the authors is a PhD EE from Ohio State University, and I don't pretend to understand all the mathematics here, but they're relying on a lot of research that was done in the early 1900s. And you'd think that if there really was something to it, somebody would have done something by now. So that's sort of my skepticism about it. And the fact that like Ed says, if you're pumping a lot of power into the I don't know, the atmosphere. I mean, it's that just trying to get. I mean, already we have trouble with very low power wireless electric meters here in the U.S. I just can't see them getting permission to pump that much power, RF energy into the air, anywhere here in the U.S. So that's a whole other matter as well.
Yeah, well, shortwave stations are shutting down because for many reasons, but some are the cost of running the transmitters and the real estate costs and things like that. But it just, well, I mean, you read a statement out about their technology, and it did sound like hairy fairy. I made this one up. It really did sound funny. But Chris, go on.
Yeah.
So yes, and I'm looking here at the Wikipedia page. So it talks about using Xenec surface waves, and Xenec surface waves. Looking at this, were originally discovered or originally created by a couple of chaps. One was a guy called Jonathan Xenec, who obviously gave it the name, who was a German scientist who was around back in the this is going back a long time. Sort of, like, I think as Dan was saying, sort of early 1900s, and so therefore it's been around a long time. But the technology, what they're trying to do essentially is to be able to get rid of the wires that send electricity around the world. We spend a lot of money on electrical grids and being able to transmit electricity between the power station and where it needs to be, where the consumer is. And they're saying they can make it much more. They're saying there's an issue there. It's aging and it's fragile, and how can they solve that problem? Where they're talking about sending that over RF using these Xenec surface waves. Now, if you go and read the Wikipedia page, and I'm not going to read it out now, it is quite hilarious because it's just gobbledygook. None of us on the podcast here could make head and tail of it, frankly. So, is it load of rubbish? I honestly don't know. I'm obviously clearly no one qualified to be able to understand what they're talking about here, but who knows? We might find in 50 years' time there are no power lines, everything comes over RF. So we could be all wrong, but we shall see on that one.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be fair on this one. We could have found an April Fool's from last year that's suddenly run to light, or somebody might have written an April Fool's early and it's been released a couple of months too early. But if there's somebody from TechZon Technologies would like to talk to us, please get in touch with the podcast. Also, there's a call sign here for a gentleman, WJ2XGB. So WJ2.
That's a call sign for the company for the tests.
Okay.
We're going to do a prototype test with, interesting here, it's saying they're ranging from 1710 kilohertz to 1900 kilohertz, with an input power of less than 5 kilowatts and an EIRP, so effective isotropic radiated power, limited to 100 watts or less. Excuse me, where's the rest of the 5 kilowatts going to? FCC license permits an ERP of up to 1,000 watts. So that doesn't make mathematical sense to me either. They've got a very, 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 very inefficient antenna to drop 5 kilowatts to 100 watts.
Yeah, well, as I say, maybe they're using the other 4.9 kilowatts to heat the bath water. Yeah, heat the bath water. Oh dear. So, okay, guys, we will stand to be corrected. But if somebody can come on here and tell us in words that we can understand that this is not a either last year's April Fool's or a beginning one for this year, please do. But it doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. So, but a bit of fun, and it gave us a bit of fun on the pre-record. So I thought we'd like to run that with you. Small little note, the next was an announcement by Sony. They're saying that Sony are likely to cease production of shortwave receivers this year. And being an owner of an ICF 7600, I didn't realise they were still making them, and they went into production around about 2000, 2001. So mine's a lovely little receiver. Often take it with me if I'm going abroad. It has SSB and everything on it, so it's HF receiver, SSB, and it's really sensitive. But I suppose there's no market for it anymore. Chris, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, I suppose it just comes down to economics. You know, is it as we've reported on previous episodes of the podcast? You know, a lot of AM stations and shortwave stations are starting to shut down. So I suppose, and these are not particularly cheap radios. You know, are they? You know, is it just not economical now for Sony to make these anymore? Is the market now so small that it's not worth them? I think we were saying before we started to record, you know, in Africa and those places, that, you know, there is still quite a demand for this, but perhaps the Sony, you know, price tag is just a little bit too much for those. So I suppose it ultimately comes down to Sony and the economics of this particular product.
Yeah. Ed was saying, I don't want to steal your thunder, Ed, but Sony used to be a premier hardware brand. They don't seem to be anymore, do they, Ed?
No, I think they're actually going more into media production now. They own various film companies and record labels and such like. That seems to be the most of their business now. You mean, yes, you still do get the occasional Sony TV and Sony radio, whatever, but you have to search for them. Whereas you'd used to go into a television, hi-fi store, and you'd see Sony everywhere, and Sony was the one, you know, the best one that everybody else was measured against. Now you have to search to find Sony. So feeling is that perhaps the company's changing its direction, and the shortwave radio section is probably one of the ones that they can drop off quite easily. You know, because people like Texun out of China, I believe, or China or Korea, is it? I'm not sure where Texun are.
China.
It's China, is it? Yeah. Okay. They seem to be advertising. They've been advertising for many years in amateur radio mags and electronics mags, and their price point is, you know, a lot lower than the Sony price point, and or maybe not a lot lower, but lower. So it's probably just a sign of the times that Sony are, you know, getting out of the market in many hardware things. I mean, Sony Walkman, you know, what happened to the Sony Walkman? The iPod came along. What happened to the iPod? The smartphone came along. Times change.
Yeah. Dan, do you have any Sony gear, Sony receivers or anything like that?
You know, I don't think I do, actually. I take that back. I do have one really old radio that had AM, FM, and the aircraft band on it, actually. But that's the only Sony I've ever really owned.
Yeah. Well, I've always been pleased with this one. It cost me an absolute arm and a leg when I bought it in comparison, and I bought it tax-free abroad. But it's a shame. In some ways, it's a shame. It's an end of an era, but with more and more shortwave stations leaving the bands, it's probably the right time, I would suggest. So, yeah.
So just on the Sony direction, so I know in the UK we have the Sony, I don't know if we still have them now, Sony stores. So in the high street you could go and go and buy your TV or your DVD player, etc. there. But I guess it could be. I know that, for example, you got the Sony PlayStation and sort of entertainment type stuff, so it could be just perhaps a change of direction. But I still think there's still a fairly strong brand in terms of the kind of electronics. But yeah, I set your point, Ed, about their, you know, music recording and film production, etc. as well. Obviously, they've obviously got lots of things and lots of pies, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, I haven't seen so many Sony stores around these days, Chris, but I did take your point on that one. Okay, our last news story. We're running quite along here today. Our last news story, and it says rumours of a Yaesu FT818. I don't think this is rumours because we've seen a request for an FCC, certification, haven't we, Chris?
Yeah, so it's been fairly widely reported that And in fact, you can go onto the FCC's website and you can actually download the documentation. So it looks like Yaesu, using a third party, have submitted some equipment for testing. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of detail apart from the label and a little bit around the frequency ranges. So what it appears to be perhaps is the replacement of the FT817, which I believe has been around about 15, 16 years now. So perhaps due for replacement. We know that Yaesu have already replaced the FT897 with the FT991, for example. So it probably is time for them to look at replacing it, and it would have certainly from the name 818, it would certainly sound like it's a replacement for the FT817. The little bit of information that is shown on the submission talks about frequency ranges, which look pretty similar to what the current FT817 does, but doesn't show anything else. There's no pictures of it. There's no other details. So, it could be it supports other modes. It could be supports, for example, fusion. I don't know. It could be that it's got a nice cool display. It could be how it's got a better battery. It might be perhaps have more power. So we'll have to wait and see. But what the good news seems to be is that it looks like perhaps there is something coming out to replace the FT817.
Yeah. Well, the FT817's been a massive market because most of the people I know have got them, and there are a few who haven't, but the most people I know have got them, and they use them for all sorts of things. Dan, any thoughts on this one yourself?
I'm the only one here that doesn't have an FT817, so I don't know that I have much of a comment. They do seem real popular, and it's almost a shame that they had, like was pointed out in one of the blogs, they didn't make more updates to it. Maybe incorporate an SDR instead of a super het receiver and such as that.
Yeah. Dan, I wasn't gonna put you on the spot and say you hadn't got the only one on the podcast hadn't got one, but no, it's okay.
That's all right.
Yeah, our friends at Yaesu are probably rubbing their hands together now, saying, "Oh, the boys have all got them."
If they want to send me one, I'd be happy to take it.
Yeah. Well,
I'll review it. I'll review it on my blog.
Yeah. Lovely. They're actually a good piece of kit, in fairness, and I would guess that production problems now in sourcing parts, but would be where I would be going, that they've got to change it. But Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just going to come with the same point there. Being I think it's 16-year-old design of the original 817, which was upgraded to an 817ND, where I think the output transistors were changed and the 60-meter band was added, and a couple of other minor changes. The fact that the application to the FCC lists it as 818 rather than 791, which was rumoured about 6 months or a year ago, suggests to me it's purely an upgrade rather than a replacement. As in, you won't be able to buy the 817ND anymore. You can at the moment. They're still manufacturing them. And as everybody said here, it's a small rig. It's multi-mode. It's top band to 70 centimeters. It gets used by portable activators because it's lightweight. It gets used by microwave people to feed their transverters. It's just a very good all-round rig. It's not cheap. Yes, we're still selling lots of them. So the 817, so the 818 is more than likely being forced upon them by the fact that they can no longer get parts such as the Collins filters for the plug-in filters, or some of the transistors are now end of life from the manufacturer and so on. So I guess it's going to be more of a refresh, because the frequency ranges are staying the same. It's still a super het, still no support for 4 meters because the IF is at around about 69 megahertz, so you can't do it. Various other things like that. To me, it's like the ND was. It was a slight upgrade. This one might be a bit bigger upgrade, but we'll only know after the Tokyo Ham Fair, which is when the other information like the user manual and other things that were submitted to the FCC will then be released for public viewing. Yeah, so Tokyo Ham Fair, what's that, September, October? And then we'll know more. Presumably they'll have a prototype there to display, and going by the usual things, it'll be about a year later before they're actually released for sale. But might even be a bit longer, because I suspect they'll have a lot of stock of the 817ND they'll want to sell first.
Yeah. Well, for those of you who now are frantically Googling the FT818, let me just give you a quick warning. We interviewed a guy a few years back, Roger Lapthorne, G3XBM, and Roger did an artist impression of a mock-up of an 818 as a April the 1st joke. So if you go and look for an 818, what it looks like at the moment, you might just see something that looks like an 817 with a colour display on it and bits and pieces. That was Roger's April Fools of a few years back, so don't instantly get excited, boys. But I'd like to see this one. I think this is a good and about time for a refresh. Right, that concludes our news stories. Now let's have a quick see what the boys have been up to. Dan, do you want to go first?
My big project has been updating my technician class study guide. That new question pool has come out, and I'm hard at it. The interesting thing about the new tech question pool is they actually gave those of us who were instructors and doing study guides a shot at editing the questions, and they actually took a lot of my suggestions, so I was quite happy with that.
That's good, Dan. That's good. So at least you have an input at both ends. So hey, you could become the top man in training. We'll vote for that one, Dan.
Well, I think I'm disqualified because I make money off study guides.
Yeah, but you're putting all right. There's a cost to producing those study guides. The amount of hours you put in, that's a fair thing in my books. You're making that much effort. You're entitled to make some money out, and you help people. And I know.
Oh, right.
Yeah, so there are people that I've known who have bought your books and been more than happy. So I don't see a problem with that.
That's what keeps me going. The good feedback I get from people.
Yeah. So Chris, hang on. We're going to publicly do this. And Dan, you forgot to say you did our club talk. Really good club talk.
Oh yeah, that's true too.
Yeah,
it was a blast. It worked perfectly, and good audience, and hopefully I made some new CW operators.
Yeah. It was very, very good actually. Yes, I was very impressed, and the technology held up, which is also good. So it was good all round.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So Chris, what have you been up to?
Well, apart from going to Dan's talk, a couple of things. So, not done a huge amount of operating. I have had a little bit of time off work last few days, so I've actually been having a look at FT8. And we did talk previously, I think on the previous episode, or maybe one or two episodes ago, about an operating guide that a chap put together. It was ZL2IFB, which I've been having a play with. It's actually really, really good guides, and I'm currently working through it. So, very, very impressive. So, haven't done a huge amount on it, but yeah, certainly the guides looks like it helps a lot. And then this morning, I was listening to the ISS going over. There was a school contact with I think it was University rather than a school, but there was a contact with a station in Lithuania. So I had a little listen to that, and I put a recording on Facebook. In fact, I might even put a link to it actually on the ICQ podcast Facebook group. Perhaps we can have a listen there, perhaps if people are interested. So that's been about it for me, Martin.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like I think you might have done a little bit more than me, because I've been a bit out of it. But what have you been up to, Ed? You've been out in the cold.
Yeah, I've been doing a few things actually since the last time. One that links nicely into our last article, our last discussion point about the FT818. It looks like my FT817 is going to get replaced, or has now been replaced, with a 20-watt portable rig, and about the same size as the 817. And you'll hear more about that later on in the show, because it's the feature this time. But just briefly, I bought myself a Xiegu, the Chinese company, X108G, for about half the price that you normally get them for, because I actually got it through an auction on eBay. brand new. So I was very happy with that, and been playing around with that. And one thing I've been doing is this last couple of days making up data leads for it to connect to the computer to use it for FT8 and setting all that up. And the reason I've been doing that rather than anything else is it's been very cold here, and I haven't been able to get out to finish work that I've been doing on my antennas. My main antenna here used to be an 80-meter, a month ago, was an 80-meter sky loop, so a horizontal full-wave loop wire antenna. But the storms that hit us in early January didn't do it a lot of good. And I spent over a week trying to find the faults and repair them and replace parts and etc. And at the end, I decided it just wasn't worth it. And I've gone back to my 40-meter, so half the size loop, which is a lot easier for maintenance. And that's now all working. So I still have to do a little bit of tuning on that. But my latest problem is, as of about 3 days ago, it went to about -10. And the fiberglass pole, telescopic pole, I can't bring it down to get to the feed point to adjust the length because the pole itself is frozen up inside. So I now have to wait until the temperature goes up so I can even move the pole without breaking something, either me or the pole. So been very cold of late. But despite that, on February the 5th, also still horribly cold, like -9, -10, I activated 5 SOTA summits in half a day. So SOTA's still a big part of my radio interest at this end. Next week I have 2 more planned summit activations, and then I'll hopefully be using the new rig for those, so that I'm ready for the 10th of March. And the 10th of March is the twice annual European to VKZA summit to summit event, and we might even add a 4th continent this time, which would be Africa. We'll have to see about that. We're trying for that. All details are on the SOTA Reflector anyway, if anybody's interested in that. So SOTA's still a big part of my amateur radio here, whether it be chasing or activating, and now I've got the new rig that'll be getting up onto some summits as well. So done quite a lot in the last month.
Yeah, sounds it. Well, I can guarantee you that you won't hear Chris or I on the air on the 10th of March. Reason is, that's Mr. Rothwell's wedding. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, and the lovely lady you hear on some of our jingles, Emma, are tying the knot. And I promise...
She's making him an honest man at last.
She is, and... I've been asked to be his best man, but the thing is, I've had to promise to behave myself. I'm struggling, Dan. I'm struggling. But so we won't be around on the 10th of March. But wish you all the luck on that one. I've predominantly been doing VHF and UHF stuff, more local, talking to locals recently, and mobile stuff. I must get back on the air. I've had a number of training courses to do for work, computer-based ones, and I end up doing them at home because I don't get bothered. Did make a 9-to-1 unun, and I've got some wire, and I've got to put it up a fishing pole and see how well that works at some point in time. I thought that looked interesting, so I made that. And this weekend, by the time the podcast goes out, Chris and I would have probably been to the Belfast, because we've got the Belfast plan, HMS Belfast plan this Saturday. So, I should be up there operating with Chris on Saturday, a day before this podcast goes out, unfortunately, guys. But listen out to us, and you may hear us. So I think we've all been reasonably busy. You guys more than me, though. So, Okay, well, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me tonight, because it's been good fun, as always. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU.
My pleasure, as always.
Yeah, cheers, Dan. Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Nice to have been here.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Yeah, it's been fun as usual.
And I didn't screw any of the call signs up, so I'm doing well tonight. Okay, 73 guys, and we'll catch you all again in a few weeks' time.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY, and we start off with news in the UK that the organisers of the London-based amateur radio rally located at Kempton Park have decided to cut the number of rallies this year down to one, with the only rally taking place on the 15th of April. Organiser Paul Berkeley, M0 Charlie Juliet X-Ray, has commented by ending the November rally, the single event will be a better day for visitors and stand holders. The organisers are working hard to refresh the event by replacing some of the well-known sellers who are not attending, mainly due to ill health, silent keys, retirement and business closure. Happily, new businesses are attending to fill the void. So hopefully, going forward, that the Kempton Rally will pick up nicely for those that attend in the south of the UK. The RSGB is looking for a QSL bureau volunteer for the MW and 2W subgroup due to retirement of the current sub-manager. It's an active group with growing QSL where involving between 15 and 20,000 QSL cards delivered in 3 or 4 batches for sorting and distribution each year. The prospective volunteer will need to have some time, a little space for storage and basic spreadsheet skills. As part of the reorganisation, some M0 groups are also being consolidated. News here from the RSGB. So obviously, if you're interested in getting involved, drop an email to qsl@rsgb.org.uk to get involved. The CWops group are pleased to announce that it's now accepting nominations for their prestigious award for the year 2018. The purpose of the award is to recognise individuals, groups and organisations that have made a great contribution towards advancing the art of practising radio communication by Morse code. Criteria may include some of the following: authors of publications relating to Morse code recruiters, trainers, mentors, coaches, instructors, public advocates of Morse code, organisers of activities, design inventors who advance the art of Morse code operation, and other contributors of the art and practice of Morse code. So certainly, if you know anybody that could be nominated, or if you feel like nominating yourself, we've put a link to this on the ICQ podcast webpage, and you can certainly get involved and make your nomination made. Well, now we head over to our features episode, which is a feature on the Xiegu X108G, provided by Ed Durrant DD5LP. Hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hi, this is Ed, DD5LP. As many of you will know from listening to the ICQ podcast, one of my interests in the amateur radio hobby is portable operating as part of the Summits on the Air scheme. With HF conditions being poor of late, I have needed to take along my modified Ramsey Q-Amp linear amplifier to boost the output of my Yaesu FT818 up to the 20 or 30 watt level. Recently, there has been some buzz around the new X5105 HF transceiver from the Chinese manufacturer Xiegu. It's just become available in the US through MFJ and sits in the Elecraft KX3 market with many similar features and size. Xiegu as a company has been building HF transceivers for a while, with the X1M followed by the X108G and now the X5105. With the release of the X5105, the price of the earlier X108G model has dropped, and more have become available on the second-hand market, possibly from people wishing to buy the new model. I found the X108G interesting as it's a 20-watt transceiver, about the same size as my FT817. Of course, with 20 watts out, I will no longer need to carry my amplifier and its cables to the summits. It covers top band through 10 metres, or at least the bottom part of 10 metres. It runs SSB, CW or AM and digital modes if a PC is connected. The fact that it doesn't cover 6 metres is not a problem here, as portable operation on 6 metres is not allowed in Germany. I was lucky to find a bought but unused X108G on eBay and was able to buy it at a very good price. So what I want to cover in this piece is the unboxing and initial impressions of the rig. There have been two main versions of the X108G, the indoor and the later outdoor version. The differences are a larger screen with more options displayed at once on the indoor version and a smaller but brighter colour LCD displaying less options on the outdoor version. The indoor version has 5 function buttons while the outdoor only has 4, presumably to allow for the wearing of gloves when operating outdoors. The internals and capabilities of both versions are the same. I've bought the outdoor version. In this review of my new portable rig, the Xiegu X108G outdoor version, I should point out to start with that this is a review from an SSB operator. Although the rig can do CW, I cannot say what it has and has not for CW operators. It's strange to do an unboxing on an audio-only podcast, but I'll do my best. The unit comes in a 29 by 23 by 10 cm box, and cutting open the box, the internal packaging is white foam plastic. In the box there is a service card, the user manual in Chinglish, the rig, its power lead, a USB cable for PC connection, and a microphone. The microphone is one of the DTMF type units which can control certain functions of the radio through various buttons. Software drivers for the USB port are available from Xiegu's website. The power lead does not have any fuses in it, which is a little surprising and will need to have them added, at least in the positive lead. The rig itself is a black metal case with a front panel of 12 by 4.5 cm and a depth of 19 cm. There are protection handles fitted on the front and the back of the rig. On the top of the rig is the speaker output, and the rear panel has one antenna socket, the DC power socket, an accessory socket for data modes, an external speaker socket, a Morse key socket, the USB PC socket, an earth cable connection point, and an auxiliary socket which isn't currently used. There are also FCC and CE stickers on the rear panel. The front of the rig has the 5 cm colour LCD in the middle, with the combined volume on-off control and the microphone socket to the left and the tuning dial and 4 function keys to the right. The whole of the underside and the 2 long sides are finned to act as a heatsink. The feel of the volume control and tuning knob are fine, but the function key buttons seem to be very rubbery and floppy. Okay, enough about the physical description. How does it work? As I'm initially testing at home, I added a fuse holder and connected to my shack 13.8 volt supply and to the station antenna, an 80 meter sky loop. In the field, I'll be running from a battery and using a portable antenna. So now the fuse holders are in and the power and antenna attached. What happens when I turn the rig on? After displaying the Xiegu logo and current firmware information, the operating screen appears. It's small, very small, but despite that, the modern-looking colour LCD display is easy to read. The audio from the built-in speaker is a reasonable quality and quite loud, but distorts when you turn the volume knob over halfway. An external larger speaker would address this, I think. There is no headphone jack on the rig, only the external speaker socket on the rear. Perhaps the unused auxiliary jack could be repurposed to supply a headphone-level audio output. Looking at the display, the S-meter was permanently showing S9 plus 60 dB. In other words, all of the green and red blocks are illuminated. After investigation, I found that there is a hidden menu where the S-meter can be calibrated, and this had not been done. Looking at the forums, I found what should be close values, entered those, and then tweaked them a little, and now the S-meter is showing the same as my IC7300 on the same antenna. To change frequency, or to change bands, you first have to move 2 bars above and below the digits in the frequency display to the digit that you want to change. To do this, you press the function key next to the TS plus to move left, or TS minus to move right, and then turn the tuning knob. This means the tuning is either tens of hertz, hundreds of hertz, kilohertz, tens of kilohertz, hundreds of kilohertz, megahertz, or tens of megahertz. It doesn't take long to get used to, especially if you're used to touching the digits to do the same on an IC7300. The Xiegu is not a touch screen, however, so the function button that can have different functions takes the place of just tapping the level of change in the frequency. There is no waterfall display, as this is not an SDR, and there would not be enough room on the small LCD display for one in any case. Selectivity, I would say, is similar to my FT817, but not as good as my IC7300. At this price, I shouldn't expect that. Sensitivity, however, is surprisingly similar to the ICOM. To change features and settings, there are a list of 4 menu options displayed on the right of the LCD screen and 4 buttons alongside them. You push the tuning knob in until you get to the group of 4 functions that includes the one you want to change, and then pressing the small function key selects the option and you can change it. To change values within menu items, as opposed to just turning them on or off, there are 2 buttons to the right of the tuning knob, the upper one for up and the lower one for down. The rig has 2 VFOs allowing split operations as well as RIT. It has memory channels where common frequencies can be stored. There are 3 filter settings, 2.3 kHz for SSB, 6 kHz for AM and 500 Hz for CW. There's also a built-in electronic keyer. AGC settings are similar to most rigs with fast, slow and off. There are 3 noise blanker settings. The noise blanker does work, however I have not yet noticed any difference between the 3 setting options. Perhaps they all suit different types of electrical noise. A nice feature, similar to what is also on the IC7300, is an SWR scan around the frequency you are tuned to test your antenna. For some reason, however, I cannot find any exit out of this feature other than turning the rig off. Not a problem, but I would have expected a stop function. So, what about the actual output power? The label on the carton says something in Chinese and against it 18 watts. Now does that indicate only 18 watts, not 20 watts? Not that the difference would be noticeable, or does it mean a minimum of 18 watts output? Well, I connected the rig up to an SWR power bridge that I have had for some time and trust its readings, and tried the rig at levels from its minimum half a watt setting up to the 20 watts maximum. Putting the rig on AM on 20 watts on the 20 watt scale of the meter showed exactly 20 watts out. The smaller power settings were close to what was expected. Of course, on SSB, we all know that voice peaks on a normal SWR bridge are going to show about 2/3 of the actual PEP value. On the Xiegu, whistling into the microphone on 40 meters lower sideband took the meter over the 20 watt level. So my belief is that in fact the PEP output on my particular rig on 40 meters is likely to be around 30 watts, not 20 watts, a positive surprise. I have the audio compression set to number 2, as suggested on the forums. How does the audio sound? Well, it's certainly not hi-fi, but it is communications quality, which is all we should really expect. Here's a little clip of what the radio sounds like when the bands were in a horrible state, with an SFI under 70 and K at 3. That was a sample from 20 meters. As you heard, station's not that strong and a bit of a high noise level. 80 meters a little bit better, and the receiver on the Xiegu seems to handle the electrical noise around here not too badly as well. Here's some 80 meters.
You're over the 9 all the time on that last transmission. In fact, at one point, almost 15 over 9, so sometimes signals seem to go up before they disappear. I've noticed that in the past as well.
There were some issues with transmitted audio on the earlier releases of the X108G, but these seem to have been resolved, perhaps through one of the firmware upgrades that have been released. For the price of the rig, I find it good value. It will not replace my IC7300, but it looks like it will replace my Yaesu FT818. Even though it doesn't have 6 meters, 2 meters or 70 centimeters, I rarely use those last two on my 817 in any case. For a non-technical person, the lack of local manufacturer support could be a problem, in which case I would advise purchase through a local radio dealer rather than over the internet. In that way, should there be a problem, you have someone to turn to. The X108G forums are helpful, but really aimed at the more technical user. So there we have it. The growth of the Chinese ham radio manufacturing capability, probably not a threat to the major Japanese or US players yet, but as each model improves, they could soon be, and for a ham on a budget, well worth a look. This is Ed, DD5LP, 73.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
As this episode 260 of the ICQ podcast draws to an end, there are a few announcements we'd like to make. I'd like to thank Ed for his feature on the Chinese radio, the X108G. I'm not going to try and pronounce the manufacturer's name because I don't want to get it wrong. But Ed, I know you did it. So, yeah, great. Sounds a great little radio. And I'm glad you're having fun with it. And it's certainly going to help Ed with his SOTA activations by being able to go out with less equipment in his bag. Moving on, if you would like to find out more about the ICQ podcast, the best place to go is the website where we publish all sorts of things as well as the show notes, the current show notes and news articles that happen throughout the fortnight that we're between records. And there are some news articles that don't quite make it into the podcast, but are still very valid. Colin and I are on Facebook and Twitter. You can obviously see us what's going on there. And I know Colin's also and myself are also on LinkedIn. I'm sure that all of the other presenters are also on not only Facebook and Twitter, but and LinkedIn as well. So they're all contactable. Or you can contact them via info@icqpodcast.com and then Colin will forward the email on to them. Don't forget, if you want to get hold of the podcasts or you want to use an RSS service, use our own RSS service because the Google RSS feed, thing called FeedBurner, was stopped development on that about 6-7 years ago, and as the RSS file hits the maximum number or the maximum size, it all falls over, and we had that problem about 6 months ago. So some of the earlier episodes, if you really want them, you'll have to go back and use our RSS feed to get them. But they're still available, so don't worry about it if you want to hear the early ones. I'd like to thank the guys for joining us on the round table and thoroughly enjoyed the chat. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH, Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU, and Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP. I think we had quite an interesting discussion and a few laughs along the way. If you'd like to get involved, have a look at the website. If you've got some suggestions you'd like to come up with, or things you're doing you want to tell us about, we'd be more than willing to listen to you and maybe put together an interview, or if you want to record some audio and send our way, we would potentially run it, providing it's not libelous and not going to get anybody into trouble. And if you want to contact us as well, you can get hold of us via the form on the website or the email address info@icqpodcast.com. Now, the website is www.icqpodcast.com. Don't forget, Colin does a newsletter to tell you when the podcast has been released and any news updates that happen throughout the fortnight. So if you go over to the website, please sign up to his newsletter. There are a number of other ways you can get us. We're on TuneIn Radio. We're on iHeartRadio. A number of websites also have players. We're on iTunes. And we're also on YouTube. Now, I know we're an audio podcast, but we release the audio podcast to YouTube, and we do have listeners that listen to it on YouTube. So thank you very much for that. You're not our major download, but it's just another way you can find us if you want to listen to our podcast. So don't forget that's lots of ways to get hold of us. I'd like to thank our donors, each and every one of you, for your donations. They do help us keep the podcast advert free, as Colin says, and it's very true. There is a cost involved in doing this, and the few donations we get do help us along the way. So thank you very much, and rest assured we do not want to take advertising. And I think that's the right thing to do. I'd like to thank each and every one of you for your downloads. They're very, very much appreciated, and that's what keeps us coming back to produce these podcasts for you, and your feedback you give us. We tend to get a lot of feedback by meeting people and pressing the flesh, and I know that a lot of our presenters are out there at radio clubs, both sides of the pond, and in Germany. Ed's out and about, so we're always willing to talk to you, and we appreciate your feedback. It's something we get a lot of satisfaction from. Okay, well, there's not much more for me to do than to make that lovely Mrs. B a cup of tea when she comes in a few minutes' time from work, and I'm sure I can find her a chocolate biscuit tonight. So don't forget, guys, we'll do it all again in a fortnight's time. 73.